Well, hello again, my friends, and welcome once more to the Invisible College. And we've got another interesting lecture today, which kind of completes a little trilogy I'm doing, or have been doing, which began with the whole thing about the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, where many people believe that Jesus was actually buried and not the Holy Sepulchre Church, or what is now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, on the other side of Jerusalem. This Garden Tomb area, and it's very interesting what's been discovered there, or supposedly discovered there. And we've been into that in the whole lecture. Then I did another one on the stars of Jesus in the stars, his passion, the death, all of the events around the crucifixion, the going up on the hill, the being nailed to the cross, the name Inri being put there, the actual death itself, the resurrection, all being kind of shown in the stars. And I'm not talking here about astrology. I'm talking about kind of symbolism, as above, so below. And it's quite extraordinary the way this all works out when you go into it, these stars, in a way that it kind of indicates that there's a plan behind all this, much, much bigger than we imagined. It ties in with our mythology, it ties in with why did we call certain stars certain things. You could only do things at certain times when certain things were happening. It is actually quite extraordinary, supernatural, I would even say. Now in this third lecture, we're going to look at why I believe that we're living in the apocalypse, and how that is also reflected in the stars. And this is very much connected with my book Signs in the Sky, which was first published actually in the year 2000, and that's the year we're going to be talking a lot about. That was a kind of crucial year for the beginnings of all of this. But anyway, let's jump ahead. Let's go into the lecture itself, and we'll see how that takes us. And this, as I say, completes this little trilogy. So what have we got here now? This is called Herald Stars for the Birth of a New Age. We're going to see what those herald stars are. Now, in earlier lectures, we've looked at the pyramids as symbolic stars on the ground, and they're very, very important, these pyramids. And I'm going to be doing more lectures on the pyramids and what they symbolize and why certain things were coded into them that are not obvious unless you actually sort of delve a bit more to find out what's going on. And of course that's very much what Robert Bovell did with the Orion mystery. I've taken it further in my own direction, and he's done other books as well in his direction, exploring these amazing buildings further. Now the pyramids of Giza seem to have symbolized the belt of Orion. Now if you've been following these lectures at all, you'll know what I'm talking about. As I say, this was the core of the Orion mystery. You can see how when you superimpose the two pictures, you get the exact image of the stars fits precisely on the pyramids. The two are sort of more or less on a diagonal, one offset, and that's true of both the pyramids and the stars. So they fit exactly, and I'm quite certain that these pyramids were meant to represent the belt of Orion. Nobody's refuted that, although the Egyptologists totally ignore the idea. They just don't want to hear about it. But maybe when that generation of Egyptologists dies out and younger Egyptologists come to the fore, these ideas will be embraced, and they'll say, well, we knew this all along. That's always the way, isn't it? Anyway, Orion itself is one of the most easily recognized constellations in the sky, and I'm sure most people here will have some time or other in their life either looked up and seen it or been shown it, this figure that looks like a man really, with stars in each shoulder, his belt, his two knees also shown with stars, his sword dangling at his waist. And you can see here how the lines draw out together to give you this image of Orion in the sky. And two things I want to show you here, or draw your attention to, is first of all, in his left arm, he's facing down towards us, he's looking down at us. So that's his left arm, he's holding what could be a staff or a bow, depends how you want to interpret it. And then you'll see his right arm is reaching upwards. Sometimes it's shown holding a club as the top part, other times people see that as being his arm and with hand reaching up. And you see he has his sword dangling from his belt there. And next to him you'll see the brightest star in the sky, Sirius. And you can find Sirius very easily from the belt stars. If you sort of follow the line of the belt stars downwards, you'll see this very bright star, Sirius. And I should be talking more about Sirius in later lectures as well. Very important star to us. And here we can see that the Egyptians called the constellation of Orion Sahu, and they symbolized it as a walking man. You can see he's holding a star, cupping a star in one hand. He's looking backwards at it, and he's also holding a staff in the other one. And this hieroglyph with the three uprights with kind of loops around them, and one upright lying horizontally with a loop, that is the glyph for Sahu, or Sach, which is their name for Orion. The figure's actually reversed as it would be when seen from God's eye view, which is to say from outside of the celestial sphere. I just have to say a word on that. Imagine you have a celestial sphere. Actually, I've got one. Let me go and get it, and I'll show you on that. Right, here we have a celestial sphere. I can hold it there. And you can imagine that all the stars being on the inside of a sphere, big sphere, the fixed stars that is, the planets are thought to be on inner spheres made of glass in the old days. That's how they thought. And the planets move separately. But the fixed stars, they're fixed because they all move together as one big, like a sphere around us. Actually, it appears to us that the sphere is spinning. So the stars rise and they set, they rise and they set. You see different stars at different times of day and different times of the year. That's a whole other subject too. And you notice it has an equator going round it, which is a sort of projection of our equator into the sky. And you can see the Milky Way as this great band of stars. It goes right round and comes up here, goes right round like that. And there's also the ecliptic, which is shown on this celestial sphere as positions of the sun, and that also goes right round. And I should be saying a bit more shortly, but you can see the ecliptic crosses over the Milky Way. It crosses over there, and it crosses over there in two different places. Crosses the equator, that is, and it crosses the ecliptic here, and it crosses the ecliptic down here. So one crossing point is in the northern hemisphere, up here. Where's it gone? There. And the other is down in the southern hemisphere, down there. So these are two positions. I'll say more about that shortly. But anyway, all the constellations, if you're looking from the outside, you've got what I call a God's eye view, looking down on it. And the stars, when you're looking down on them from that side, they're reversed compared with how we see them. We see them as though we were standing in the middle of this sphere looking outwards. So we would see Orion looking down at us. And that's the opposite of what we see here. So it looks, when you see on this picture here, as though it's in his right hand, this star, and the left hand holding the staff. But actually that's reversed. If you're looking at it from below, looking outwards, it's actually his left hand that's cupping the star and his right hand that's holding the staff. It's got to be reversed. So I have actually reversed it here. This is how we would see it, looking from inside. From an Earth-centered viewpoint, looking up at the sky, Sahu would appear more like this. So it's his right hand that's cupping the star and his left hand that's holding the staff. That's how we see it, looking from below. We see then that the star is above his right hand while the scepter is held in his left. And this, in fact, is how we see Orion. We see the staff or scepter in his left hand, while his right hand, alternatively his club, reaches up towards the ecliptic. I haven't drawn the lines in here, but there we go. There they come. You can see here the lines. And there's, you can see that as being a bow or a scepter. I mean, it depends how you're looking at it. And you can see that's in the left hand. He's facing down at us, and the right hand going up towards the ecliptic. And there we see Sirius. I'll be talking about Sirius in other lectures later, so it's not that I've forgotten it. Brightest star in the sky, very important star. We'll be talking about that another time. So there you can see in a diagram taken from Sky Globe, and you can see there the orange line running through is the ecliptic, and we can see the sun at the position, the median plane of the Milky Way. You can see it's halfway down through the Milky Way, and also it's on the prime meridian here, because this is when it's passing over in the south, actually in Egypt. So this point also intersects with the median plane or equator of the Milky Way. The ancients understood that this was one of 2 points in the sky where the median plane of the Milky Way intersects with the ecliptic. Well, I've just shown you that on the sky globe itself. And they regarded these as the gates of heaven. In fact, they used to think that souls come in and out of those 2 gates. There's a whole lot in a book called Hamlet's Mill, which I recommend you to read sometime if you have the opportunity. Very interesting book on mythology, going way back and covering this very point, among many other things. One in the north, the Orion Gate, and one in the south, the Sagittarius Gate. And I call them stargates for reasons I shall explain. Yes. Getting back to Egypt, the Papyrus of Ani, which is now in the possession of the British Museum, is one of the best preserved versions of the Book of the Dead. It likely dates from around 1500 to 1400 BC, during the New Kingdom period. I think that would put probably in the 18th dynasty. And such papyri were commonly buried with the mummies of more important Egyptians to provide a guide to the afterlife. And actually Ani was a scribe, a kind of priest, and he would have been drawing, may even have drawn this one, these kind of papyri, the Book of the Dead, that we call it today. It contains lots of prayers and invocations of the gods and talks about what's going to happen after life. So this is a kind of guidebook for the person who's being buried, and they'd have this popped into their coffin with them. Very interesting, and a huge book this one was. I think it's something like 78 feet long. This great long papyrus split into various bits. Anyway, it includes a sentence that begins, "I open the door in heaven." And the hieroglyphs for door is a star with an eagle determinative. And you can see there. It says Apsba, and then there's this little determinative hieroglyph of a chamber with an open door. And you can see that there, and then following on from that, Pet, in heaven. So I opened the door in heaven. Well, what's that? That is obviously the door in heaven over the hand of Orion, the Stargate, because it goes on to say to the Egyptians heaven was a real place and not an abstraction. It was the Duat region of the sky, and Orion was the most important part of it. And once the pharaoh gets there, he's going to rule upon the throne. So it says here, that's what follows on. I rule upon the throne. Well, what throne is that? It's actually the throne of Osiris. That seems an odd thing to say, I'm going to rule upon the throne of Osiris, but this throne belongs to Osiris, who resides in Orion. So it's a throne in Orion. Thus, this text is part of a pharaoh's hoped-for identification with Osiris. It's the culmination of the funerary rites of Osirification. So they see that there's a throne in heaven, and Osiris is the king of the dead. He rules from Orion, and he wants to be part and parcel with that throne, with that kingdom. That's what he's hoping for. And it's rather like we say, it's Christians, we want to be one with Christ. Christ sits at the right hand of the Father, whose throne is in heaven. So it's we can see similarities. I'm not saying it's the same thing, but we can see similarities in the idea of this idea of going to the kingdom in heaven, thy kingdom come, etc. So now we look at detail from Senmut. He was a vizier of Queen Hatshepsut, probably around the same time, this new kingdom. And the desire of the ancient Egyptian pharaohs to become one with Osiris had much in common with the desire of Christians to become one with Jesus Christ. And I just said that. And you can see here Orion, the three stars there, and you can see I've done other lectures. I've talked about these specific stars above in the other lectures. But you can see very specifically, if you look along that, in that red box at the top there, you can see in the right hand side, you can see an eye with a throne and a seated figure of a god. That's Osiris, Alcir. So that's Alcir with his throne, right? It's in the lower part of Orion. This is what it tells us here. And that's where they want to go. They want to go to the lower part of Orion, where Alcir, Osiris, has his throne. And it's actually in the sword of Orion, which is in the lower part of the constellation. So the difference between them and us is that the Egyptians had a very clear idea in their minds that Osiris had his throne in a particular place, Orion. Their prayers were therefore more specific. Christians, by contrast, while wanting to become part of the body of Christ, are not clear about what this actually means. We're much more vague. It's somewhere nebulous, somewhere invisible, some kind of other world that we don't know what it is. Well, they were very specific that the next stage up, you've got to get up to Orion, mate. That you want to move on from planet Earth and you want to go to Orion. I mean, it makes sense to me. I don't know what you think, but this is certainly what was believed by them, and actually by quite a number of other cultures in the ancient world had similar veneration of Orion. But again, I've done that in other lectures too. Now then, let's look at the North Pole and what that's all about. Now, because the Earth is spinning on its axis and the sky appears to rotate in the opposite direction, yes? The Earth is spinning one way, and the way we see it, we're not aware of the Earth spinning, and yet what we see is the sky appearing to turn round us, and it's really just because we are spinning, actually very, very fast. And this is a projection into the sky of the main axis of the Earth, linking the North and South poles. So that's the North Pole. So everything's spinning around this axis of the extension, you could say, of the axis between the North and South poles of our planet. Because the planet's spinning, everything else seems to be spinning around that axis. In the north, the fixed point is almost exactly aligned with the star Polaris, i.e. the pole star. I mean, that's what we call it. And here you can see how to find it. Most people can identify the Plough constellation, which in the US is called the Big Dipper, part of the Great Bear constellation, I should say. But you can see why they call it a Big Dipper. A dipper, you can imagine a sort of ladle for ladling out water or something. We see it as a plough. Actually, there's a ploughman as well, but that's another story. But if you follow the two end stars of the Big Dipper or plough and take them as pointers, the line linking them, it points more or less to the pole star. And that's a quick way you can find the pole star. If you can, as long as you can identify the plough, which is not difficult, you can find the pole star, and that is actually in the tail of the little bear up there, Ursa Minor. However, while the coincidence of Polaris with the actual pole is true today, it's not always been so. No, the pole has not always been Polaris. It is now, but it's not always been. And that's because of a strange apparent motion that the Earth makes. The Earth appears to have a wobble, rather like a spinning top that's running down. Now, I'm going to talk about this wobble in another lecture, and there's some very interesting and new ideas and conceptions about what causes this. This is almost really hot off the press. So we'll talk about that in another lecture, but for now, just think of it as being like the wobbly motion of a spinning top that's running down, and the point of the North Pole is moving around in a circle because of that. This causes the position of true north, as measured against the backdrop of stars over time, to precess, i.e. move backwards in a circle. So it moves around in a circle. And this is a very slow process, taking nearly 26,000 years to make one complete cycle. However, although this cycle takes a long time to complete, it's very important for our climate. For example, the last ice age came to an end 13,000 years ago, which is a half a cycle. So I think a lot of this talk about climate change and global warming and so on is probably down to this cycle as much as anything else, which we tend to assume that everything in our solar system is static, it's steady, like clockwork. Everything's going around the sun's just doing its thing, and it's all static. But it's not. Stars vary in their intensity. The orientation of the pole has a great deal of influence on our climate, and that's shown in ice records. So this is an important cycle for us, and the last time, halfway through the cycle, so you can imagine if we're now at a peak when it was at a trough, before it goes 26,000 years from one peak to the next peak, or from one trough to the next trough. But you can go half a cycle, which would bring you down, and that's around about 13,000 years, which is sort of the end of the last ice age. So we've been in a warming period since then. Right, so we can see here the precessional cycle of the North Pole moves in a circle around a fixed point. That's the point in the middle there. This is called the pole of the ecliptic. I'll just say a couple of words here. The ecliptic is the apparent circle in the sky that the sun follows, and it moves along this circle 1 degree, roughly 1 degree per day. So there's 365 days in a year. There's 360 degrees in a circle, so it's not quite a day. But it's moving along there, and it's a little bit faster sometimes a year than other times, because the Earth's orbit is not exactly circular, it's slightly elliptical. But we don't need to worry about those details. It follows this circular path in the sky, and that has its own centre, and that is the pole of the ecliptic runs through that centre at right angles to the circle, if you can understand that. If you have the circle in this plane, then there's a pole through the middle there that circle is going round. So that's called the pole of the ecliptic, and the North Pole circles around that point according to this wobbly motion. I'm sorry if this sounds a little bit complicated, but you can look this up, precession, on the internet. There's loads of articles there all about this, but I'm just giving you the basics here. So this lies in the center lies in the constellation of Draco the Dragon. This is a very large but rather dim constellation that droops around the North Pole like a serpent, and you can see it there. There's a sort of head at the bottom, and it comes up and round, and then it goes around, intersects with the circle, and then it carries on. At the time of the Old Kingdom Egypt, around 2800 to 2200 BC, the North Pole star was Alpha Draconis, or Thuban. Yeah, it's called Thuban. That star, Alpha Draconis, you see it on the right-hand side of the picture there. And now, of course, it wouldn't be exactly pointing at that star all of that time that I've given you, because it's moving. The precessional cycle moves at a rate of 1 degree every 72 years, roughly speaking. So, but it would be close enough to it, and that would be acting as the pole star for the people of that period. And in 2,000 years' time, it will be near the star Gamma Cephei in the constellation of Cepheus. I've ringed that round there. So it's not going to point exactly at that. You can see that the circle doesn't actually intersect with that star, but that will be the closest star to it. Polaris is very close, so you can see this at the top of the screen, the picture there. Very, very close to the circle, but Gamma Cephei, Cepheus. He was a king, by the way, in mythology, and I think Khufu is named after him, but that's another story. So that will be the pole star then, and it will carry on, and it will go near to Vega down the bottom there, around about 14,000 AD. So that's 12,000 years' time. It's going to be pointing fairly near to Vega, and that's one of the brightest stars in the sky. It's the second brightest in the northern hemisphere, I believe. So that's a very bright star. It's actually a double star. Anyway, that's by the by. Now, in the Orion Mischief, you've read that book. We had quite a lot to say about the air shafts, so-called, from the Great Pyramid. And the two I want to consider here run from the King's Chamber, which is the upper chamber in the pyramid. So it's long been known that a narrow shaft from the north side of the King's Chamber of the Great Pyramid points towards the North Star. And you can see I've put that line in red there, and it points towards Thuban. As we were saying, that's we call that the constellation of Draco. Now, interestingly, the ancient Egyptians saw that constellation as representing a hippopotamus. And you'll see that drawn in all sorts of drawings as a kind of monster that's going to gobble you up if you fail in the weighing of the heart ceremony. So they had sort of a feeling that this was actually quite a bad place in the sky. Certainly at one time they did. And that was kind of his one destiny, you could say, going up the northern shaft up to Thuban. And in 1966, astronomer Virginia Trimble, I think she's now a professor, discovered that the equivalent shaft of the south side of the King's Chamber pointed towards Orion's belt as it culminated at maximum elevation. So you can see this other shaft here, also in red, pointing up there. And that shaft is orientated at 45 degrees from the horizontal. So I've put that in there as well. And the angle of the shaft was at 45 degrees to the horizontal. In fact, because of precession, the belt of Orion has been moving steadily north ever since circa 10,400 BC. So I'll just say a couple of words here. It's not only the North Star that's moving, everything else is moved around as well. It's sort of the whole thing is doing this. Constellations are rising and falling over this long period of time. So the constellation of Orion hasn't been standing still, it's been moving. And its appearance in the southern sky has been moving steadily further north. throughout this period from 10,400, round about the Ice Age, end of the Ice Age, roughly around the time when people say Atlantis disappeared, but that's, another story, isn't it? It's been moving north, and we can see here that the first time, 10,400, it's right down the bottom there, and then Pyramid Age, it's actually at 45 degrees, it's up there. And then now it's gone further still. And actually the topmost star is around about 60 degrees, it's seen from Egypt, right on or just under the celestial equator. So that's pretty amazing. Obviously it rises at different levels depending on where you are on the Earth's surface. But that's where it goes then in Egypt. This puts its northernmost star, Mintaka, almost on the celestial equator. You won't actually cross it before it starts going down again. Of course, if you were standing at the equator watching it, you would see that star passing directly overhead, because the line of the curve of the equator, the celestial equator, goes overhead if you're standing on the equator. Isn't astronomy fun? This is one of the signs in the sky for the end of the age. Yes, the star reaching the equator, because it won't actually cross it, and it will start going down again. So we're at very close to the peak of the belt of Orion in its movements. Now then, let's get back to how this affects Christianity, because this is part of the triple lectures I said that I was doing about Jesus and the stars. So in the last lecture of the series, we discussed what was happening in the heavens that signified all the events of the passion, death, resurrection and ascension of Jesus. Yeah, we went into all of that, and I showed you how there were significators in the sky, the position of stars, position of the sun among stars on the days which are quite clearly when these events actually happened in 29 AD. Rather surprisingly, we discovered that all the events were matched by signs in the sky. The ascension into heaven was signified by the position of the sun, symbolic of Jesus himself, directly over the upstretched hand of Orion. This is, of course, the gate of heaven position. Orion being symbolic of the Father, just as the Son was symbolic of Jesus as the Son of God. So I want you to understand that in this signification in the signs in the sky, very often the position of the Sun in this symbolic way represents Jesus among the stars, and that Orion represents his Father. I'm not saying that he is the Son, S-U-N. I'm not saying that at all, and I'm not saying that God is Orion. I'm just saying that these are significators for that relationship. Obviously, we're talking about cosmic entities which are vast, much bigger than anything we could imagine. God the Father is the creator of the entire universe. So Orion is really just an outpost, you could say, just as the sun, our sun, Sol, is just an outpost. But the signification is the symbolism that these things present us with. So what were the stars for this day? Right, so we're going to look again at the stars of the Ascension. We're told in Acts that after Jesus ascended, the prophecy was made by what were clearly two angels in human form. You can see them in this picture. And they say, and while they were gazing into heaven, that's the apostles and other people perhaps, gazing into heaven as he went, two men stood by them in white robes and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking to heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven. So these two men in white robes, well, we've met them before in the Gospels. They were sitting in the tomb when Mary Magdalene goes there and there's no body there. And they say, why are you looking for him? He's left. He's gone out. He's resurrected. So these figures in white are actually angels, angelic figures in human form. If we take this prophecy seriously, it suggests that Jesus will return to the Mount of Olives on a day when the sun is stationed at the Orion Stargate. So they said he's going to come back the same way he went. He went on the day when the sun was positioned at the Orion Stargate. I think it's reasonable to suggest that he's going to come back on a day when the sun is at the Orion Stargate onto the Mount of Olives. That seems to be what they're saying here. He's coming back the same way he left. I could be wrong, but that seems reasonable to me. Amazingly, this now occurs on the exact day of the summer solstice, June the 21st. That's the sun is at the northern Stargate over the upstretched hand of Orion on June the 21st. Sometimes it's June the 22nd because of the leap year business can make things be slightly off. But it's, June 21st, 22nd is when the summer solstice occurs, in the northern hemisphere. So the apocalypse, now return back to the apocalypse, the revelation, St. John, predicts the return of Jesus Christ as a cosmic being. It's written in the form of symbolic riddles. We've been doing a lot of lectures on that, and I've got more to do in due course. Beginning with a vision of St. John. He meets a Christ-like personage called Alpha and Omega, first and last. Right? And the figure stands among 7 candlesticks, symbolic of the 7 angels, the angels of the 7 churches. And his face radiates like the sun in its strength. This is all in the very start, first or second chapter of the Apocalypse. His face radiates like the sun in its strength. He wears a belt around his breast. The full description is very similar to that of the prophetic being who appears to Daniel in the beginning of chapter 10 of his book. So look that up. It seems like it's the same being, this Christ figure, as a cosmic entity, not just as a human being. I should add that John himself is in spirit at this time. That's what he tells us. He's been meditating, he's gone out of his body or something. And he has all these visions in symbolic form. So what does this all mean? This part of John's vision ends with chapter 3. Ends with chapter 3. Chapter 4 begins the apocalypse proper, and it starts with the cryptic words, "Lo, in heaven, an open door." So we've got this whole question of a door being opened. Cosmic figure is now going to take John out through the door. He's going to be shown things in heaven. He's going to see the Lamb opening the 7 seals. He's going to see angels blowing trumpets, pouring bowls of wrath, and all of these things that we've been through. He's going to see that all in symbolic form in this kind of dreamlike sequence when he's in spirit. So we need to understand, well, when could this be? When is this door going to be open? And what's that all about? What does this first connection of symbols mean? Well, I pondered these words for a long time. Then it occurred to me that the door had to be the gate of heaven, which lies at the junction of the ecliptic with the median plane of the Milky Way. Well, everybody else has always talked about, or when I say everybody else, then in Egyptian scriptures and in Latin scriptures, they talk a lot about this door in heaven. It was commonly understood in the ancient world that that's where it was. And so the door in heaven, which lies at the junction of the ecliptic with the median plane of the Milky Way. Throughout the ancient world, this was understood as Heaven's Gate. It was known in Egypt especially. I realized that the 7 candlesticks represented the 7 planets of the ancients: the Sun, the Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Now, of course, we don't think of the Sun and Moon as being planets, but planets means movers, moving lights. The word star, astra, actually means a light. So there are very big lights, the Sun and the Moon, and the stars are much lesser lights. But the 7 were considered to be the collection of the lights that belong to the lower heavens. The lower heavens is our solar system, as we would call it. So you had those 5 planets. They didn't know about Neptune and Uranus, let alone Pluto, which isn't a planet anymore. They only knew about going up to Saturn. So those were the 7 planets of the ancients. And they gave the 7 days of the week to them, as you know. So I realized 7 candlesticks represented the 7 planets of the ancients: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The face shining as the sun in its strength had to symbolize the summer solstice. That's when the sun is at its strength, at the summer solstice. That's when it goes to its most northerly position in the northern hemisphere, and it's strongest at that time. It's the highest it goes in the sky. The being had to symbolize Orion, with the sun at the solstice and the planets gathered round him. When this happened, the door would open and the apocalypse would begin. That's what this vision seems to be saying, and I've talked about this before, and I'm sure many of you have seen the lectures I've done on this. But the door would open and the apocalypse would begin. So when would this be? And I looked on a computer program called Sky Globe, and I went backwards and forwards all over that, trying to work out what was going to happen. And I discovered, to my amazement, that the time was the year 2000. I discovered that because of precession, the sun is placed at the stargate exactly at the time of the summer solstice. That's now, right? And it's doing that. It's over a period of time. It'll be doing that every year for at least, a good century. But the time that was exact was going to be the summer solstice in the year 2000. And I call this the omega point, at the end point of the precessional cycle. The precessional cycle began 13,000 years ago when the sun was at the alpha or start point. Now I should just say that I was talking about how it's like a wave motion. So you've got peaks and you've got troughs. The trough was 13,000 years ago, and I call that the alpha point because it's like midwinter. In our ordinary yearly cycle, it's like midwinter in this longer cycle, 10,400 years ago, and then it's been growing ever since. And Orion's been moving up ever since, like a lift. It's going up, 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 and it reaches the top point when the sun is positioned at that gateway exactly on the summer solstice. At the bottom point is positioned exactly there at the winter solstice. And interestingly, there's a converse point on the other side of the celestial sphere in the southern hemisphere, which is actually a Sagittarius over the sign of Scorpio, quite close to if you're looking at it, quite close to the direction you would see the center of our galaxy. And that is currently at the winter solstice point. But as the cycles move again, that will move up to its summer solstice point in the northern hemisphere. So you'll be seeing the sun at that point on Midsummer's Day. And the Orion point will be right at the bottom of the cycle. So they're like 2 lifts that go up and down, up and down. So I call the bottom point the alpha position and the top point the omega. So he says, I am the alpha and the omega, the beginning and the end. He's measuring out the cycle of time. Alpha is the first letter of the Greek alphabet, and omega is the last letter. So alpha and omega is the beginning and the end. So I see this as meaning it's at the end of the cycle of 13,000 years. And this is another sign in the sky, as the book of Revelation begins with the appearance of a being called the Alpha and Omega, whose face shines as the sun in its strength, which is the solstice. I also discovered that today, at the pyramids, the sun would be at an altitude of 53.2 degrees as it crossed the prime vertical. That is a colure running from east to west and passing through the zenith point. Right, so you're familiar with the meridian. The pyramids are built on the meridian, north-south meridian, facing one side facing exactly north and the other side facing south. Yeah, and the line passing through that is the meridian. But you've got another line at right angles, which we call the prime vertical, and that runs east to west, and it goes, like an arc. Actually, the meridian does that too, in terms of the sky, but this arc, and the sun will rise in the east, and in the summertime, of course, the sun rises quite far north of east. This is astronomy. I'm sorry if you're not familiar with this. But you know how the days get longer in the summertime and then they get shorter in the autumn and winter, and you have the two equinoxes. The equinoxes are when the sun is positioned on the equator in the sky. The summer solstice is when it's at its maximum northern position, and it will rise there. And then but there will come a point when it crosses over that east-west colure. A collar, is like a great circle around the sky. You're only seeing half of it when you're in one place. And the sun will cross that point. It'll be at a certain height. It's not going to cross it exactly. It's only at the equinoxes when it's exactly rising in the east and setting in the west. But in the summer, in other periods, it's rising a bit further, and it will be a bit above the horizon as it crosses that line. And at the summer solstice in where the pyramids are, it crosses that point exactly at 53.2 degrees. You can work that out because the Khafra pyramid, if you've got a pocket calculator, you can do this. Khafra pyramid is based on a section of 345 triangle. And you can work out that the tangent of that angle of the slope of the pyramid is the tangent of 4 over 3. So you can divide 4 by 3, 1 by 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and do a reverse tangent, anti-tangent, on your calculator. If you've got a mathematical calculator, you can do that. And you'll find it comes to 53.2 degrees. Now, I found that was amazing. When I discovered that, I fell off my stool. Because it meant that if you went to the pyramids on that day, you should be able to stand at the base of the Khafra pyramid, and as the sun crossed that point, it should be seen to be sitting on top of the pyramid, and the pyramid casting no shadow. So we got a solar monument. Extraordinary. Nobody's ever talked about this before. This is something I discovered. I decided I was going to go and see it myself, but I wanted to bring a party of people to see it with me because I felt this is something that we should mark. So anyway, this angle is the same as the slope of the Khafra pyramid, or middle pyramid at Giza. It would mean that as the sun rose, it would be at the stargate and appear to sit on top of the pyramid, casting no shadow. Interesting. So what does it look like? It looks like that. And you can see, accordingly, I organised a tour. Sorry, you can't see it. I organised a tour to Egypt to coincide with this event. And there you can see it. We stood at the base of the Khafra pyramid and watched as the sun moved into place to sit on top of the pyramid. I should say that when we first arrived there, this whole area was in shadow. And gradually, as the sun rose higher, the shadow receded. Till it got to this point. As it did so gradually the shadows disappeared, at least those cast by the few remaining casing stones. That's a casing stone with the slope, the 53.2 degrees slope, and the shadow disappears. And we can see the sun sitting on top of the pyramid. And that was because these have the same slope as the original pyramid. And there you can see we're holding up an ankh. The light of the sun is symbolized as the ankh, or key of life. Its positioning at the stargate on the summer solstice signifies putting the key into the lock. That's what I think. So I felt someone had to go and recognize this and symbolically put a key into the lock, which is what I did. And there you can see myself and Nicky Carter, who produced the film, holding up the ankh. And there's a film all about this trip, which is on my website. You can have a look at that, Signs in the Sky. I therefore call this event the opening of the Stargate. However, this was not the end of the story, for close by it were 5 of the other planets, near to the Sun. You can't see them, but if you had the Sky Globe program, as I did, you can see it very clearly that there are these other planets close to the Sun. And they would be joined by the Moon a week later, making all 7. So what was that going to look like? Well, I wanted to see this too, or at least mark its significance. And there you can see if you look closely here, you'll see there's the 7 planets. You've got Mercury, Venus, Mars, the Sun on one side of Orion, and on the other side you've got the Moon, Jupiter and Saturn. So I wanted to see that, and I thought the best place to go and see that would be close to the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. So we went from Egypt, we went to Jerusalem to witness this event, or at least as much of it as we could see. So the best place to do this was at the foot of the Mount of Olives. We therefore gathered at the Golden Gate of the Temple of Jerusalem and watched the rising of the dawn stars. Right, so it was very early in the morning. We were standing there, or sitting right next to the Golden Gate, which is the gateway, incidentally, is bricked up that the Messiah is supposed to enter the Temple Mount, where at present there is the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the Muslims bricked up that gateway. They didn't want him to be able to get in. So I hope he brings a hammer and chisel with him so he can break his way through if he wants to go through that gateway. But anyway, so we were sitting there and we were watching, and we could see the beginnings of the rising. We could see the rising of Taurus there with those stars in it, the Jupiter and Saturn and the Moon, and the beginning of the rising of the Orion. But of course, once the Sun gets to the horizon, or even a bit before that, the light is so strong you can't see the rest of the stars. But we could see from the Sky Globe program, this was exactly what was in the sky at that day, was Orion standing amidst the 7 candlesticks. So this was on the 29th of June. We did not see a close gathering of the crescent. We did see a close gathering of the crescent moon, Jupiter and Saturn in Taurus, so we saw that very clearly. But we couldn't see the other ones because the sun was too bright and outshining everything. Mercury, Venus, Mars and the Sun were positioned in Gemini on the other side of Orion. So Orion's in the midst of the 7 candlesticks, without a doubt. Furthermore, this was now the 29th of June, which is the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul. I mean, if you're a Catholic, you would know that. Peter, we're told in the Gospels, was given the keys to the gates of heaven. The symbolism was all there. So it's on the feast of Peter's feast day. The sun is actually positioned there, or Orion's positioned there with the 7 planets all around it. The gate's been opened a week earlier, and now we're getting the full vision of St. John manifesting in the sky. I was half hoping we would see Jesus walking down the Mount of Olives to join us. Of course, nothing like that happened. What we were witnessing was only the beginning of the book of Revelation, its first chapter. This was in June 2000. A couple of months later, the Intifada began in Jerusalem, triggering fresh conflict between Jews and Arabs. The following year saw 9/11, leading to the Afghan and Iraq wars. Since then, the world has known no peace. Something changed in 2000, which I believe is the beginning of the apocalypse. When will it end? I don't know, but the signs in the sky tell me it is now in full swing. Soon we should see the Antichrist identify himself. So we have yet more to endure. But anyway, Here you can see Orion rising in the east over the Mount of Olives. That's how it looks if you're in Jerusalem. And I've seen this at night time in Jerusalem. It rises in the east and it sets in the west. And one of the prophecies of Jesus was, as lightning goes from the east to the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Well, that word lightning, astropy, is very similar to asteres. And I think what it's really talking about is that when you see the lights, the belt of Orion rising in the east and going to the west, you know is the time of the coming of the Son of Man. So that's what I think we are at that time. We don't know the exact date. Jesus himself says he doesn't know when the exact date is. Only the Father in heaven knows. So that tells us something, doesn't it? But I think it's going to be fairly soon. I hope maybe in my lifetime, maybe not. We shall see. But we are in the apocalypse. I do believe that. And that's why things are so crazy now. There's absolute madness that we see in the world. And it's going to get worse, I'm afraid, because this is what we're told in the Revelation. But after that, that's just the birth pangs of this new age that's coming. We're going to see the return of Jesus, and we're going to see a very, very different world manifesting when that happens. And the gates open, and who knows what's going to happen after that. So anyway, so what are the stars going to say to us when the sun next visits the Stargate position above the hand of Orion? Well, this is this year, what's coming. So I thought I'd show you something a little bit prophetic. And curiously, we can see Orion rising there at the horizon with the sun over his upstretched hand. Yeah, that's what we've been looking at all these times. Well, this is seen from the perspective of Cairo. And as the belt of Orion comes over the horizon, there will be the sun at the Stargate, Venus in the constellation of Taurus. You can see it there, Venus in the constellation of Taurus. Uranus in Aries. There we are, you can see Aries, and you've got Uranus, URA there. Mars, the Moon, Jupiter and Neptune are all in Pisces. You can see them there. Pisces is this kind of V-shaped, quite dim constellation, but very large, stretching across the top part of the picture here. And you can see the red of Mars, and you can see next to it the Moon. It would be a crescent moon, old moon, and Jupiter and Neptune. And then finally, we have Saturn and Aquarius. And Aquarius is off the top right-hand corner here, and you can see Saturn there. So actually, we got 9 lights this year on the 29th of June. 9 lights, because it includes Uranus and Neptune. So I think that's pretty extraordinary and pretty interesting. I don't know what it means, but we shall have to see what happens, won't we? You're not going to be able to see them because it's going to be daylight, but it'll be up there on all these planets. The whole solar system really is going to be above the horizon. And I think that means something, but we shall see. We shall see. Not long to wait, 29th of June. We shall see. So in effect, the sun and all the planets will be above the horizon. What does this mean? Perhaps nothing. But let's pay attention this midsummer day. Yeah, let's do that. So, I hope you enjoyed this lecture. I just thought I'd try to show you how this signs in the sky works, even in our own time. We are living in the apocalypse, I'm sure of it. And I'm not just saying that because I think things are crazy and bad. I know there's been lots of crazy bad times in the world before. People have thought, oh, it's the apocalypse. But the signs in the sky seem to be saying that because the sun's at the Stargate. When the sun's in its strength, we had the 7 planets gathered round in the year 2000. Everything went to pot after that. And we are in this expectant waiting period. the period of the apocalypse, the revelation itself, we don't know. We know that there's a period of 7 years from when the Antichrist appears. Yeah, and for 3.5 years, everyone says, "Hey, wonderful guy, yeah, great." And there's another 3.5 years when I think, "Oh, it's terrible." And then there's going to be the end of the world, whatever that means, the end of the age, reappearance of Jesus Christ, and the start of the new age. All in there, all in your Bible, all in your book of Revelation, other prophecies in the Old Testament, New Testament, you look for it. Matthew 24 and all the rest. Don't believe me? Look at the signs in the sky and watch those other lectures I did about the crucifixion, the resurrection, and so on, and how those fitted with signs in the sky. And then maybe that will help you to regain your faith a little bit. I don't know. But I leave it with you, and I thank you for watching. Thank you. Bye-bye.